Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Tom Ivester, an alcoholic. Hi, Tom. I'm a member of the Primary Purpose Group in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And I tell you, there's more people in this convention than live in my town. This is an overwhelming sight here. I've been watching Leah, and it seems like every time she gets a creative idea, about 4 or 5 more people get a job. And so she doesn't have anything to do except just be creative. I'm delighted to be here. It's good to be back in San Diego. Always is good to come here. Good to be with you folks. A lot of old friends, and maybe even more importantly, a lot of new friends. And so I'm just delighted to be here. Appreciate my buddy Tom. They gave him his job description. He said, get him in here Thursday and get him out of here Sunday. And so he's done one part of it very well. We'll see how he does tomorrow. Yeah, I am delighted to be here with you. And what I want to do is what we do. That's basically share what we were like, what will happen, and what we're like now. And certainly I want to do that. I don't particularly want to, but I'm going to since I'm already here. And it won't give my money back. Now I'm a member of the Primary Purpose Group. I'm not somebody that flits around from one group to another. I'm somebody who is a true home group guy. I belong there. I'm a member. I'm a responsible member. I'm a well-informed member, and that's where I belong. That's where I take my real position in AA. It's where I do my most important service work. And so I'm a home group type of guy. And a little later on, you'll probably see how that comes together, but that's very much who I am. And so I always like to identify that as being a very, very basic part of my identity. I tell you, I'm not going to lecture on home groups, but I just tell you this, that I heard a sort of a strange mystical definition of group one time. A group is 2 or more people, one of whom need not be present. And somehow that made sense to me, because I'm a member of that group if I'm 30,000 feet in the air. I'm a member of that group where I go. It's as much a part of it as my fingerprints. And so that's the way I approach AA. Yeah, I'm not somebody who flits around like a hummingbird, bird. And so I'll tell you why I got that way. By the way, I swear to God, I'm just looking, when I see lights like that, I feel like I ought to be doing like this and standing there with a number on it. That's not a totally unknown art to me either, by the way. More will be revealed. But it is a distinct pleasure to. I want to see that guy with 55 years. I told Jeff, now 55 years, I'm 53, 55 years, it'd be hard to remember whose it is. You know, might be mine. I might have forgot a year or two. Let me tell you where it came from. I was a guy, I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, the 2nd of February, 1957, and had no earthly idea that I would be stepping into anything that I'd never want to leave, and I certainly didn't feel that way for a while. Yeah, I didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but I knew it was going to be bad news. I really thought it was going to be one of those old Bible Belt revival type things with deep dunking and snake shaking and God knows what all. And but that's when I walked in. And I have never felt more out of place anywhere in my life than I did in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the youngest guy there. In fact, I was the youngest guy everywhere I went. for a lot of years. Now, I heard that there were some young people in AA, but they sure hid them from me. Yeah, I didn't see anybody my age for probably the first 5 or 6 years in the program. We finally got a guy in North Carolina who came in younger than me, and I wanted to kiss him. I swear to God, I was so glad to see that boy. If he hadn't been so ugly, I probably would have kissed him. But I was glad to see. I got so tired of people patting me on the head and telling me how lucky I was to be in this swinging outfit called Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah, right. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I died. And if anybody had told me that I would still be here, it's something else. It wasn't only because of age that I felt totally out of place, because I was not only with people older than me, but people drunk longer than me and in very serious conditions. Now, I'll tell you right now that it was an unusual setting, not in the sense of the makeup of the AA group, but it was in a maximum custody penitentiary. And felt a little out of place there too, but nonetheless, there I was. And so I felt totally out of whack there, totally out of place. And there were a lot of reasons for it. I'll just mention a couple. One, I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I'd been diagnosed as alcoholic by everybody who ever captured me. I never had any diagnosis in my life other than alcoholism, except ugly, and that's fixable. But I didn't believe I was alcoholic. When I first heard alcoholism described as an illness or a disease, I found that an awkward, clumsy, almost embarrassing kind of a thing to factor. I thought, what on earth is a disease or an illness about getting drunk? I knew illness is what followed drunk. I mean, that was just natural. It was a natural cycle that occurred. But I didn't have any clue what that was. I was a totally undeserving guy, in that I felt totally out of place, even in a penitentiary, in that every meeting I attended, I felt like I was the worst guy in there. Now, I'm not a criminal, per se. I've never plotted a crime in my life. I've never committed a predatory act in my life. I've done goofy stuff in bars, but I've never have. That's just not part of who I am. I'm not a thief. Now, if you left a drink on the bar, I might help you finish it, but that's not thievery. That's just sort of helping out a neighbor, I guess, is what that. So it wasn't. What I was in a penitentiary for was the same thing that I'm sure everybody here readily recognizes. Maybe even family members more than those of us who are alcoholic. But I was in there for a crime that I don't think as an alcoholic in the world couldn't identify with it, particularly if you were somebody who had blackouts. I was a guy who experienced that thing that I think everybody fears doing, who's got a reckless pattern like mine. I'd always figured that I wouldn't last too long. But I never really believed deep down that I would do great damage to anybody else, and didn't deliberately. But I woke up one morning in jail, and what I was in prison for, I woke up one morning in jail, didn't know what I was there for, assumed it was the same as always, either drunk, hustling, scuffling on the street, or something like that. And when I was awake for a little while, I knew the routine. I was a regular customer in that jail. And so I knew the routine. And at 10 o'clock, the jailer would always come by, see if anybody wanted to try to make bond and get out. And so I just went up to the bars. This was my usual deal. And saw the guy coming, and I said, "Hey, guy, when can I get out?" And he looked at me with total scorn. He said, "I hope never." And I had no idea what he was talking about. No earthly idea. I knew he wasn't kidding at all. It was very, very serious. And so I took that in and was mystified, but didn't pose any more questions. I went back into the tank, and one of the people in there, I guess that one of the inmates, apparently had read the news or radio or whatever, and heard what happened. And he said, "Do you know what you're here for?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, last night some guy was driving drunk down the main street of the city and struck and killed 2 people. And he said, they've arrested you for the crime. And that was, there's some information that you can hear but not handle. And when I heard that, that was just more than I could take in. I don't understand much about the mind, but I understand this, that it won't take in what it can't handle. And I was just incapable of accommodating that information. And I just refused to believe it, and that I could have done something like that, and then gradually accepted the truth, or what appeared to be the truth. I didn't know, but it appeared to be the truth. And I had committed a crime. It's horrendous enough, there is no adequate punishment. I mean, how could you possibly punish somebody enough for causing 2 people to lose their lives? There's no way. And so I was not an insensitive guy. I was not somebody who was callous about human life. And that absolutely just destroyed me. I couldn't even think about any kind of a life. It was the only time I'd ever been in jail. I didn't want out. I was afraid to get out. I was ashamed to get out. I was ashamed to be breathing, for God's sakes. And so certainly getting out of jail, I was always scrambling to get out, but not this time. I didn't care. And I didn't really care what happened. I just wanted to be gone, just wanted to disappear. And I'll never know why, but for some reason there was a policeman there at that place, and I'm not going to try to find out who he was. I think he just chose to remain anonymous. But anyway, he apparently looked at the record, saw that I had family in North Carolina, called my folks, and told them the situation I was in. And I know there are a lot of family members here, and Pat, sorry about the loss. But families, I honestly believe that families suffer more from alcoholism than the alcoholic, because they have to face it sober. They have to deal with the embarrassment, humiliation, and trying to explain away stuff that's unexplainable. And so when my family was contacted, they did what families so often do, even though it makes no sense. They made a trip to Michigan from North Carolina that they couldn't afford to make, to get a guy out of jail that didn't even want out of jail, but I didn't know how to say that. I mean, how do you tell somebody you don't want to get out of jail? And they hired an attorney that they couldn't afford. And he did what attorneys do. He looked at the factors and then presented a case, and I was released on bond. I was charged with manslaughter. And I knew it had nothing to do with alcoholism. Now, I'd been thrown out of the military at age of 20 with an undesirable discharge for alcoholism. But you know about how much that meant to me. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. I really thought that I was a potential rocket scientist who just never really got off on the right foot. That's really what I believed. And but I'd been diagnosed as alcoholic by everybody. And so I wasn't thinking about alcoholism. I was thinking about the overwhelming guilt associated with that. That how could you possibly drink after having done something as horrendous as that? It just seems unthinkable, unless you're alcoholic. And then not drinking would seem unthinkable. But I didn't think about either. I was in there from the. Anyway, I was released on the 17th of July of 1956 on bond to await trial. Knew that I wouldn't drink, but it had to do with just the overwhelming guilt. I thought it'd be impossible to pick up a drink. Just didn't understand. I didn't drink the first day. I walked the streets all day on the 17th, all night, till about noon the next day. And on the 18th of July of 56, around lunchtime, noon or so, I started to drink, of course. And then from the 18th of July to the 19th of November, I drank literally like nobody I've ever seen. Now, I've seen a lot of alcoholics. I came in during the era when 12-step work was the program. We weren't doing a lot of fancy book studies and philosophies and theories and stuff. It was action, man, it was action. I've worked with thousands of alcoholics, and I'm talking about hands-on with alcoholics. I held an alcoholic in my arms while he died on a 12-step call, and even as he died, he was not an alcoholic like me because he was still fighting. And what happened to me when I started to drink, I just literally just gave in to the illness. I don't have any doubt that I was trying to drink myself to death. You know, it's a weird kind of logic that happens in an alcoholic mind, I guess. I think the only reason I didn't just overtly commit suicide was that I didn't want to add more weight of burden to a family that had already been overburdened for so long. And I guess in my strange thinking, I must have thought, well, if I'm just found dead of an OD or hit by a train or whatever, at least there'll be a question. But it had nothing to do with alcoholism. And so when I started to drink, I just did my best. I'm confident. I didn't think it out loud, but I'm confident I was trying to drink myself to death. And then I had what I hope and pray was my last drink on the 19th of November of 56. That morning, I finished a bottle of gin and 3 or 4 inches in it, maybe finished a bottle and went off to court. Knew that it was a one-way trip. Didn't have any sense of anxiety about outcome. I knew it was going to be a one-way trip. You know, the hell of blackouts is there's no defense. I mean, how can you explain something you don't know anything about? And so when I went into that trial, I didn't have any doubt about outcome. I listened to the trial as if I were on the jury. And they put me on the stand, and all I could say would be the same thing you would say if somebody rapped you for something you did in a blackout. And all I could say is, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. And I listened to the evidence like they listened to it, and I would have voted guilty exactly as they did. And so I was found guilty on the 19th of November of manslaughter and sentenced that day to a max of 15 years, a 5 to 15-year sentence in the state of Michigan. In the state of Michigan, that meant to go into maximum custody penitentiary at a place called Jackson. And now I'd been in jails God knows how many times, but it was always overnight stuff in a drunk tank or a short sentence in a county jail or a pea farm or a stockade in the military. It was always just sort of social nuisance kind of level, you know, not serious stuff. And so they, this was going to be different. And so when that sentence was passed, I guess I had a very human instinct of fear, just a reflex action of fear. And I don't know what, but it's just, you don't need a reason for alcoholics to experience fear. And so I fed that sort of panicky feeling and then passed the sentence, that sentence. And when that sentence was passed, I felt an enormous sense of relief because I knew it was over. Now, I'm not talking about happy ending or there'll be help in that strange place or there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about it's done. I don't know if you've ever talked to anybody who had a near-death experience, but I can really identify. I've had some friends who went through near-death experiences, and invariably they express that relief that comes from knowing it's over. And that's exactly what that was. I knew it was over. And the next day I was led in, almost like cattle, with 5 guys and me on a chain while we led into that maximum custody penitentiary. I knew when I walked in I would never come out. Had absolutely no illusions about that. Had absolutely no fears about it. I was resigned to the fate. And so when I went in there, I won't go into any sort of penological stuff, but suffice it to say, I've been to prisons around the world, and I would rate that one as probably the 3rd worst that I've ever seen. You got some dungeons in California that I've been to, and one of them I would put on the, I don't guess you win a worst award, do you? But you got one I would rate as anyway. That's go to the library if you want to know about this stuff. I won't spend too much time on it. But I knew what this was. This was a place that was staffed with people like me off the streets in Detroit and Flint and all of those nice little wonderful places up there that are products of the automobile industry. And so when I walked in, I knew my life was over. And I truly didn't care. I was almost like a comatose guy. I was conscious of where I was and the address and all that kind of stuff. But I was just a guy that was out of touch. I didn't engage in any conversation with anybody about anything. If they asked me a direct question, I would answer. But otherwise, there was no conversation. They put me in a cell. I didn't know who was in the cell on either side of me. It wasn't I didn't care. They just didn't exist. And so I went into that cell, and if it had been up to me, I would never have come out of there unless I had to. What I wanted to do was disappear, and I could do it in that cell. And I spent my time doing anything I could do to keep from thinking. That's how I spent all of my time. And if anybody had told me that something was going to happen to dramatically change my life, there's no way I could have believed it. And if you picture a guy like that, I tell you this, and I don't have any need nor means of proving it, but I think you could see it, that if it had been up to me to look for help in that place, I would have died in that place. There's no way. I would have never asked for help. And it wasn't that I was resistant or too angry or hostile or anything like that. I was too totally unworthy. Yeah, I couldn't have asked anybody for a drink of water, for God's sake, never mind help. And so I know that I would have spent my time just like I started out, sitting in that cell trying not to think. And then one day, a guy called me out for an interview and did the typical kind of intake thing, did a social history and went through that. When he got through, he made the same startling discovery that everybody who'd ever captured me made. And he worded it a little different. He said, he looked at my record, about 3 inches thick, and it was all drunk and. I didn't have a crime in there that wasn't drunk and whatever. You name it, and it probably is in there. And so he held that thing up, and he said, man, you've had a lot of trouble with booze. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, that's obvious, good God. Yeah, if the Pope drank like me, he'd have been, well, anybody would. I better not go in that neighborhood. But he exclaimed that. He said, you've had a lot of trouble with booze. I never had it put to me quite that way, but it was not any shocking revelation. And then he said, we have an AA group here at the institution, and I think you ought to go. Now, he might as well have told me to stop the Dairy Queen and something. I didn't have any clue what he was talking about, nor any avid curiosity about it either. I mean, I didn't ask him, what do you mean by that? I didn't ask him anything. He made a comment. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to prolong the conversation. So I listened to what he had to say and left. I'd never heard of AA. Now, certainly this was a long time ago. And AA was not a household name, but it wasn't a total secret. It was to me. I mean, I'd never heard of it. I never heard of anybody helping alcoholics. Never in my life. I predated detox, well, unless you want to call jail detox. It's a very effective device, by the way. It works quite well, particularly if they go upside your head with a blackjack before they put you in the cell. It works extremely well. It's just short term, because the memory fades. But I'd predated that. Treatment hadn't been invented. So what they did with alcoholics was just put them in those kind of cages and tell you, man, you ought to do something. We hadn't invented the capturing ethic, where you put a leash on them and drag them into meetings and mandate them and all this stuff. We hadn't gotten that sophisticated. Back then, just said, you ought to go to AA. Well, that didn't mean a thing to me. He might have well said, you ought to go jump out of a parachute. It didn't mean a thing. And we went back to my cage, and a little later, I got a note. It wasn't a letter, just a little note. It said, you can go to your first AA meeting, February 2nd of 57. Well, I didn't know what he's talking about. Now, I think some of the guys must have, somehow I'd heard the term Alcoholics Anonymous. That is not a jazzy name. It does. Sobriety rocks. Right on. Alcoholics Anonymous. little figure to match there. But anyway, he sent that note out, and somebody told me Alcoholics Anonymous, and it sounded gloomy. I didn't have any clue what it was. But I was blessed. I mean, strange kind of a way, but I was totally blessed with complete defeat. Complete defeat. Now, I really appreciated what Jeff read in that chapter 3, that section about alcoholism, where just what he said, that we learned that we had to fully concede. That means surrender, give up. That's not being defeated. It's about accepting at the depth of my soul, I am beat. And I was blessed with that. Thank God I was blessed with that. And so when I got that note, I just almost like a robot, I just sort of wandered over to what that meant. Somebody told me where the AA group was, so I wandered in. And just like I introduced myself, I walked in on that second day of February at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the school building. And it was not, I've heard tons of people talk about their first meeting and what a wonderful sight it was to see all those smiling faces. I didn't see any. There were smiling faces. I saw a lot of faces, scarred up ones and beat up ones, and it didn't seem like the welcome wagon was in place there. But anyway, I walked in. The only guy I spoke to had an officer on the door. Ivester, read my shirt. Ivester, yes, sir, sit down. So I went in and sat down in the middle, not in the middle, but on the edges of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't realize it, but at that prison, there were 6,300 and something guys there the day I went in. And so everything was full. And that's where you had to have a little note saying you could go to AA on this date. You had to have a chair. I didn't know that. I learned it later. And so that was the guy that walked in. So you can see what I was talking about in the beginning, that a candidate for AA I was not. I was somebody, I felt deeply ashamed to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. Not because I was too good, because I was too bad. Even sitting in there with people who had committed crimes that defied imagination. And they didn't put a damper on me because the overwhelming sense of shame and remorse and guilt that I felt was equal to anything I ever encountered in that place. And so that was the young fellow who sat in that meeting. Like I said, I was the youngest guy there. And I didn't identify whatsoever with anybody. I was in AA for 2 years before I ever heard one single person with whom I identified. And when I did, he was as unlike me as anybody I have ever seen in my life. Now, I was just a character. I was just a character. Inside, I was an isolated kind of a guy that was slow to let people get close to me and all that kind of stuff. On the outside, just to dispute how I really was, I was a town clown. I was always the guy that was the life of the party. I was always the guy that was starting something. But that was not how I was. And so the real guy came out. And so I sat in those meetings just totally isolated. I didn't identify with a single soul. And then this guy came in one day that I still feel sorry for that guy. He was from Detroit. And I think the guys from Detroit that were going to be coming up to do the meeting that day, I think they lied to him and told him they were going on a cookout or something. And here's this fella. Well, he was just a pasty-looking guy. You know, he just looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. You know, just a kind of roly-poly little fella, and scared slam to death. Yeah, I watched him when he's coming in, and always he's peeped behind himself to see if anybody's sneaking up on him. And it's bad enough just being there. And then those sadistic jokers from Detroit pushed him up to the podium and wouldn't let him sit down and made him speak. He didn't want to speak. He didn't want to be there. He didn't much less speak. And that guy just sort of squeaked out what little bit he had to say. You remember Tiny Tim? He was produced in California, you know. You wouldn't keep him, you see. But he was so scared, that's what his voice sounded like. Yet he squeaked out this little bit of stuff. And he's the first guy I ever identified with. He was as different from me as a human could be on the outside. But he was the first guy that I ever heard describe alcoholism as it really is. The only thing that had kept me in AA for those 2 years was, I'm a great fan of speaker meetings. I'm a great fan. I think it's the purest form of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's when one of us opens up and shares our lives with others of us, and it's how we identify. Well, we don't get sober by edification and all this kind of higher training and none of that. It's about identifying with somebody just like me. And that's what happened that day. Yeah, our experiences were different. This guy had never been in jail. I don't know if he ever drove by one. Yeah, but he was a Mr. Clean if you ever seen one. But he talked about alcoholism as it is. It's not about all the circus acts that surround alcoholism. It's about what happens on the inside. It's about dying on the inside. It's about losing the ability to communicate even with people you love. It's about being locked up in exquisite isolation that you can't get out and nobody can get in. It's about living in fear. It's about living a dying, just a slow death on the inside and nobody knows about it. That's the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. You know, I'd been sitting in meetings and I would listen to people, and sometimes you hear some strange stuff here, and we don't particularly misrepresent facts or anything like that, but sometimes a story is just a little drab if you don't kind of liven it up a little bit, so sometimes, well, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Heard a guy one time say he was stone drunk for 40 years, never sobered up. Well, that has a bit of a credibility problem with me. Married the same woman 5 times, the same week. On and on, just stuff, those things. But anyway, the only thing that had kept me in Alcoholics Anonymous was that, I know what I'm saying to you. I have no clue what you're hearing. It's none of my business. That's your business. And so when I listened to people telling their stories, what I thought they were saying was that they were alcoholic because when they drank, they got in trouble. And I thought, well, my God, if that's what it is, I've had that all my life. But that's not alcoholism, it's just being a social nuisance. But that's what kept me here, eh? It kept me in the seat long enough so that I could really identify. And that squeaky little Tiny Tim fella was the one that did it. And I knew I was in the right place. Strange kind of an introduction. I was blessed. Y'all won't be insulted if I take my coat off. It's been cold here. Man, I almost went shopping for winter clothes. Thanks very much, Jeff. That's better. But what I was really blessed with a number of things. Those people who shared with me for sure, and I was blessed in that I went into a solid group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd tell you why I'm a strong group man, as opposed to just sort of lightweight meeting type stuff. The group I went into at that penitentiary was as fine an AA group as I've ever been to. It was an excellent group, and I don't mean that we had 300 Congressional Medal of Honor winners there. I mean, it was a typical slice of life. And just like any time we gather, we're not one thing. It's like here tonight. Here we've got people, I guarantee you, that are brand new. We may have people in their first day, and certainly in their first week. And then you got people as old as me that may not even live through the meeting. I mean, that's me. So we're a wide range of people. We're not one thing. And anyway, the thing I was blessed with was that it was a good, solid group. And I mean, it had a core of people, almost like any group, just like this convention. You're calling off people that were heavily involved in this convention. You got a lot of us who are just watching the action. And then you got a group of people who are in there serious as a heart attack. They're going to make sure this thing works. And that's exactly what I ran into in the first group I was in. And the strange thing about a group, as opposed to just a casual gathering, a group has a sensitivity to things that even in a cannibalistic society like that, the guys in that group there's just sort of an innate sense about how to deal with somebody new. You know when to leave them alone and just let them stay over whatever they're doing, or to either pick up on it, that they need a little extra boot, or they need some encouragement or something. I don't know what it is, but there's a sensitivity to that you'll instinctively know how to deal with people that are in front of you. And that's what happened. Some guys, I don't know if they saw a profound need or what, but some of the guys in the group, nobody ever said you want to get involved in service.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
I didn't know there was such a thing. Nobody ever mentioned anything about it, but sometimes they'd say, hey, Tom, help us carry this table. And even I could do that. Well, I may not figure out where to put it, but I could pick it up. And I didn't understand how important that is in starting to feel like you belong to something, eh? You know, physically. If somebody comes in new to my group, I don't hand them a book. I hand them a broom because I want them to go to work. I want them to be on the team. I want them to feel that sense of participation. I don't want to get out of the isolation. I don't want to get them into a think tank day one. I want to get them to sweat if they can. And so I pass that on because that's what happened to me. And guys started saying, Tom, go with us. Where are you going? Don't worry about it. Just come on. So I said, all right, I will. I did. We had wonderful experiences. We started a group. We had a mental hospital. That place is so big, it was just like a city. You know, it had a mental hospital in there. We started an AA group in the mental hospital. Very interesting endeavor. That was interesting meeting, man. Yeah, sometimes you'd have 10 meetings going on at the same time. You know, it may have nothing to do with AA, but they were interesting. Now, I don't know if any of those folks ever stayed sober, but this old boy did. It's kind of a hard-nosed program, you know, that you know, I hope some of them did. But number one, some people say the new person is the most important person in the room. Not if I'm in that room. No. I'm the most important person in that room. Because if I ever get too frivolous with that, I may be the new person. So I'm going to make sure I take care of mine the best I can. And so, but that's what started to happen. I started getting introduced. The guys did a good job of introducing people. It wasn't taking them through the book like we do now. It wasn't that kind of stuff. But they basically did a good job of introducing new people to what Alcoholics Anonymous was, what the book is, what sponsorship, what's a group. You know, a guy one day, I point back there because normally we've got something hanging up or standing up with steps on it. One of the guys in the group one day was talking to the newer people, of which I was one, and was explaining the steps. He said there are 200 words in those steps. And if you'll take the actions that are spelled out in those steps as honestly as you know how to do, when you get through, you'll be a different person. And it doesn't even matter what your motives are. And I thought, come on, man. Yeah, I mean, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I was a street character. I know you don't throw a fastball to expect a curve. Yeah, I mean, it just, you got to be straight up. But yeah, I found it to be absolutely true. Absolutely true. Because what I did, we hadn't invented this thing of taking people through that I ever saw. There's some rumor that it was done better in the old days. If it was, they sure hid it from me because I never saw it. You know, the name of the game back then was action. That was the magic word. And so I fumbled my way through those steps. You know, I didn't have a sponsor per se. I had one guy in the group that I had a lot of confidence in. He was a good guy. He was a fellow that was a lot of wisdom. He's one of the wisest counselors I've ever seen. And he was not a counselor. He was a robber. But he was a recovered robber, and he was a tremendous asset to me at AA. And he was the guy I took my fifth step with. You know. And so, yeah, I had a little bit of help like that, but it was basically to sort of get you best hold. And I didn't. It was not any beautiful piece of work, but I'll tell you this. When I got through fumbling through those steps, I had an absolute transformation. Transformation. It's like I had a new mind. You know, I had a way to live that I'd never had before. I was always just a guy scuffling through life. Never had any plans, goals, or ambitions, or anything like that. And all at once I started having a life, and I started having concerns. And I started learning how to do things I'd never learned to do before. I became a citizen. It was a lousy town, but I became a citizen there. First place I ever made it a better environment. Yeah, I usually reduce property values by moving in. And here, all at once, I'm looking after something. Pretty good citizen. In the joint, they'll call it being a good convict. But it's operating with integrity, whatever you call it. It's about being who you say you are. If you say you're going to do something, you mean it. You go to bank on it. You know, those are things I started doing. Core values I should have learned as a child, but never did. And so that's what happened in a strong group. And so I got extremely active in Alcoholics Anonymous and truly had an absolute, they can't do any more. It never has for me in 53 years than it did in that first 3 years in there. I became a different guy in every sense of the word. I became free for the first time in my life, locked up like a wild animal. And I became free. Learned that people, being in a cage doesn't make you in bondage. That's a circumstance. That lack of freedom was how I lived in this total locked-in world. And so I became a free man and learned to operate with decency and integrity and honesty and to be caring for other people and learned how to do stuff in that kind of a weird environment. Something happened. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm always afraid to look. That something happened. I'll just be ignorant. When you get enough, wave, and I'll sit down. But what happened? I stayed in there 3.5 years, and I was called in 2 years. I was called in by the state parole board, and I had no earthly idea what for. I mean, I wasn't eligible for anything. On a 15-year sentence, 3.5 years was the minimum required for parole eligibility. And I was well aware of that. And I was called in by the parole commission on my second year. And so when I walked in, the chairman of the board, we weren't personal friends or anything, but he said, "Come on in, Tom." He said, "You probably don't know what this is about." And I said, "You're right, I don't." And he said, "Once every roughly 10,000 cases, we'll pick what we consider is an outstanding example of rehabilitation, and we'll offer something called special parole for special merit." And it said the board decided to take a look at you as that number 10,000. And he said, "Now I'll tell you up front that we're not going to parole you because the crime is too serious and the time served is too short." And I told him what I honestly believed. I said, I absolutely agree, 100%. It is, because with a crime like mine, there is no adequate punishment. It doesn't exist. But there's a rule of reason, and that must be applied. And so he said what he had to say, and then so I thanked him for the review and the information. And he said, "What this assures that you will go out on your first eligibility, and you can count on that if you continue like you're doing." Well, I mean, that was a signal honor for that to something like that to occur. And so I knew it was coming back. They told me that they would parole me, but I would have to come to North Carolina. I couldn't stay in Michigan. And I said, "Would you let me think that over?" You know I did. And I said, "I may want to go back to Mayberry after all." And so I started making arrangements that, transition is a snap. I know that you get a lot of people who come into the West Coast from all over, mostly from Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, and once in a while a refugee from North Carolina will come out here too. And so you use it. But transition, what I found, is a snap if you're solid in the program. It's almost a no-brainer. If you're not solid in the program, it's an adventure. And so I was solid in the program. Could not have been more solid than I was right then. And so a year before I was out, I started checking around a little bit, found out that there were said to be 2 groups in my town that I was going to be paroled to, which was my hometown, where my family was. And I wrote, the 2 groups listed, I wrote to the one with the biggest number on it of members. And that was in 1959, I think. And I haven't heard back from them yet. It's, but it's not as bad as it's worse than it sounds, really. That because I learned after I got there, it was a good reason, that AA was almost a rumor in that town rather than a reality. And the members of the group I had written to were all gone, and the last 2 people, the man and woman who started the group, had burned in their own home. So there was ample reason it weren't. And the other one was in shambles. And so when I wrote one more time and got a good answer from a guy who became my second sponsor, and So I went to that town, and now I said we had a strong group in that penitentiary, and we surely did. And when I got out, I tell you, the first meeting I went to on the street was, honest to God, the worst meeting I'd ever been to. And I thought, good God, is this it? I mean, is this all there is? If we'd have had a meeting that bad in the joint, somebody would have got hurt. I mean, that wasn't going to happen, you know. And so I thought, my God, you know, I'm 25 miles from our biggest city, and I said, I'm not messing around with this junk. I'm going to go where the action is and let this thing go into orbit. And then a disturbing thought occurred to me. When do you become responsible? When do you take your turn at the plate? When do you pick up the load? When do you start being there for somebody else? If I hadn't had a good background, good preparation, solid recovery, I wouldn't have been thinking that way. I'd have been thinking, somebody come get me, you know, and get me out of this mess. But I had one of the finest experiences I've ever had in my life of starting Alcoholics Anonymous in a town. What a marvelous experience. When I read about those first guys and gals in the program who started AA, I can identify with that. Because somebody right here in San Diego, I don't know who it was, it may be this guy here, but somebody in San Diego got the word and planted the flag right here and said, we'll do it here. And held the flag till somebody else came. And that's how AA got started. And that's how I got started in that town. I've been to God knows how many meetings alone. Good meetings, too. They're good meetings. I've never been to a bad one. Business meetings were a snap. And but I had, yeah, if we had a half day, I could tell you the stories galore with that thing, because it was an absolutely unbelievable experience that well, I'm not going to, but they're just fascinating to me about how it comes alive and what it takes to make it go. And so I stayed there and did that. And when I left that town 2 years later, we had 60 members in that group. And that's all it takes is just one person holding the flag and saying, we'll do it here. And then hanging in there and seeing it through. And today there are many groups in that town, but that was a great experience, eh? And it showed the value of good, solid preparation in a real group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and why transition is a no-brainer if you're solid in what you're doing. And so that's what happened. And I just sort of went at it. I was as active. I've met a lot of active people. I've never met anybody more active than me. I was like a wild man. Man, I was running around like I was second week I was out. Somebody asked me to go to a prison. I said, are you nuts? I just got out of one. I'm not going in one of those things, man. I couldn't get in. It probably wouldn't let me out. And they said, oh, it's all right. Come on, man. I said, you better hope I get out, or else hope I never get out. So we went, you know. So I started that. 2 months later, I'm the outside servant. I'm the outside sponsor. I'm the trusted servant to give leadership to something like I just left. I'm still on parole from a maximum custody institution, and I'm the trusted servant giving leadership to that effort. A marvelous experience. 2 months after out, about the same time, my parole guy came to me. You heard what my crime was. When I left Michigan, on my parole paper said this man's never operated a motor vehicle, period. And I accepted that as a fact of life. Never gave it any consideration. About 2 months, my parole guy came to me. It doesn't take too long to size folk up. And so he came to me and he said, Tom, you're real active in this AA thing. And I said, yes, sir. And I thought he was going to tell me to slow down. And I knew I wouldn't, because parole would not keep me out. Your rules have never been enticing to me. I've never seen a rule, even if I wrote it, that I didn't want to break the next day. And so yeah, and he said, wouldn't it help you if you could drive? And I said, yes, sir, but I can't. It's like he didn't know. And he said, well, let me take a look at that. And sure enough, he called me to come up and meet him at the Sears store. It does sound like Mayberry. That's where the licensed agent, where my sister drove me up, went back and walked in. Don't ask me to explain it, I can't. You know, what I found is that when God's got something for me to do, the walls come down. I don't care what they are. They come down. And I don't think that, I know that without any question. And when I walked in there that day, my guy was broke. I was standing there talking to the guy. He introduced me to him. And the fella that never seen me before in his life, he said, my guy says you might be interested in having a driver's license. And I said, well, yes, sir, it would be helpful. And now I can't explain this because it's probably illegal and it should not be explained. But the guy handed me a driver's license. He already had it made out. And didn't even ask me if I knew how to drive. I mean, nothing. No test, no horn blowing, nothing, man. And he didn't even pay for it. It's amazing stuff. And when God's got work for us to do, the walls come down. And I was DCM 5 months after I was out. Same guy who wondered if it would ever be trusted by anybody to do anything. And here are the people, my closest family, outside my own family, in 15 cities asking me to be their trusted servant. What an honor, eh? What an honor. I'd done 2 years, not at Michigan State, but from Michigan State while I was locked up. And I was a tremendous student. Yeah, I'm not a drug addict, but I have sucked up a ton of speed. I mean, a ton. And I got to launch Sputnik, I promise you that. And when you do a lot of speed, it screws up your wiring is what it does. And you just get seeing goofy looking stuff. But I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. And I tell you hear some marvelous stuff in AA. I mean, profound truths that just haven't escaped to the world. I was sitting in a meeting one day, and I can't sleep. Man, I look like a raccoon. I got a black circle around my eye. And a guy was speaking. He said, I had a lot of trouble sleeping when I came in AA. And so my ears just perked up. And he said, I learned how to deal with it. So I'm just avidly tuned in to what he's saying. He said, if you can't sleep, stay awake. I thought, now what is wrong with that fool? That's as dumb as can be. But no, it isn't, because that's what you're going to do. And while I couldn't sleep owing to the electricity of speed, that's when I finished 2 years from Michigan State University. I couldn't sleep. I put it in work, and I could speed read. Man, I could read a textbook overnight. I mean, I was good. Probably didn't retain much, but it was good. And so I could spell DCM when I got out, and so I got the job. And so you see who I am. You talk about prisoner freed. There's a place in the book we got the story of the prisoner freed. And I was freed before I ever left the prison. And it was just a matter of putting it into my life and going at it. 2 years after I was out, and I'm just doing what I described, I got a phone call from the headquarters of the prison system in our state. And some of you are well aware of this. A few of you are. I got it from the headquarters of our prison, the guy on the phone. I'd met him once. He'd been making one of those, you know how headquarters people will go around and look out at the colonies and see what's going on. He was touring the facility. And I think somebody told him to go by there and just say hi to me and tell him they appreciate the work or something. But anyway, we spent 2 minutes maybe, just told me who he was, and then we said goodbye. And it was him on the phone. And I remembered the name, and he said, Mr. Ivester, said, we are expanding the rehabilitation program in our prison system, and we were wondering if you would consider accepting a position in that. Now, I already told you who's answering the phone. And I said, do you know who you're talking to? And he said, oh, yeah, we've checked you out. And, of course, they had. And I take it, now, today, this would not be headline news. But the day of that phone call, there had never in the history of this planet been an ex-offender hired as a professional staff member in a prison system. And I was well aware of that. And I was also well aware that they were not going to start with me. But if they're going to do it, they're going to start with somebody. And so the thing that blows my mind, I swear, if you loan me just a couple minutes on this, I can't believe. Now, North Carolina is not La Jolla. I mean, it is, We are not the Berkeley of the East. You know, that we're rednecks is what we are. And we're the state that elected Jesse Helms for 100 years. And so if you're going to do an earth-shaking thing and do something that has never been done, don't bet on North Carolina to be the pace setter for that. But they were. And I couldn't believe that. I didn't even ask them if they paid. I'd have done it for nothing. And so I said, man, I'd rather do that than anything in the world. And to myself, I said, there ain't no way. But when God's got work for us to do, the walls come down, even those. And I was employed as a rehabilitation officer was my title. And God, when was it? 61, I guess it was by then. Just under 2 years on the street. The state of North Carolina had to negotiate with the state of Michigan to get me discharged from parole so I could be a professional employee. I still don't believe it. I swear, my career's over, but I still don't believe it. Just as remarkable, from day one, I never had one single person in all of state government even ask me about the history. Obviously, they knew it, for God's sake. They had to get me released from Michigan. Obviously, they knew it. But nobody ever said, do you realize what a risk we're taking with you? Do you know that nobody's ever done this before? Do you know if you screw this up, every inmate in the world is going to suffer? Nobody said a word. They welcomed me into the organization, treated me like a professional, and that's exactly how I acted, because that's what it was. You know, I'm a tradition guy, and I fully understood traditions. The moment I take a penny for my work, I am no longer doing a service. I am doing a job. And so I take absolutely no, and I knew that then. And so what helped me, there was nobody on earth that I could talk shop with. And AA traditions helped me more than anything else to understand how to operate appropriately in an organization. I'll always be grateful for that. And I'll just tell you this in just a rush and hurry. I went in, and I'm not some guy that believes that God's going to do puppet shows just to show he's there. I'm not that kind of thinker. But I truly believe that miracles happen. And they are when God has work for me to do. And what happened, I went to work. And from the day of my first job, you take this to the bank. This is absolutely true. Sounds like weird, but it's absolutely true. From the day of my first job, I never one time in my entire career ever applied for a job, including the first one, to my last one. Never applied for promotion, transfer, pay raise, nothing. And I went from a rookie entry position to the top of the system. I was employed at the highest professional level short of political appointment that I could be. I was a correctional administrator and oversaw several prisons. And so it was an unbelievable thing. But what happened, and it wasn't because my uncle was the governor or anything like that. The only politician I knew was the sheriff in my county. And that was a professional relationship, but he was the one getting paid. But I never did. And I don't think there was anything all that mystical about it. I'll tell you what it came down to. I did every job that I had, every single one, as if it were the most important job on earth. I gave it my very best. And it wasn't because I was ambitious or hungry for promotion or anything like that. It was because my work tells you who I am. And if what I do is sloppy, shabby, unpredictable work, that's who I am. And so my work tells you about Tom I. And so I got recruited to every job I ever got. Somebody see what I was doing, thought it looked interesting, saying, how about doing this? I became the go-to guy for creative ideas that most people had enough sense not to do. I had a director of prisons that was a brilliant man. He was a cold-blooded scientist, but he at the same time was a social activist who really liked to tear down boundaries. But he was a fascinating man. I had a love-hate relationship with him. And one day he called me and said, come by the office, I've got something I'd like for you to do. And that normally meant pinch hit, you know, doing a college class or civic club or something. And I went by, I read it and said, what is it, boss? He said, Tom, I'd like for you to take over an institution as warden. And I'll tell you one thing, when you're sitting in a maximum custody cell and all you can see is bars everywhere you look, of all the things that your imagination might take off, can you imagine some guy sitting in that thing and say, you know, I'm going to get out of here and run one of these suckers. It'd really lock you up. But anyway, that's what I'm doing. And he said, I'd like for you to take over an institution as a warden. And when I got up off the floor, even though I'm working there, I mean, it's one thing to be mud wrestling with the guys, you know, and doing a lot of stuff like that. But he's talking about me being the man. You know, I'm not even supposed to be carrying a weapon, for God's sake, and then he's going to give me all the weapons. So, and I got up, I said, boss, man, I don't want to be the head screw. And I lapsed into the vernacular, and he said, I don't want you to be the head screw. I said, well, what do you want? And so he told me, and he was just that kind of a strange person. He just told me, just verbally, just said, I want to see a prison that goes from confinement through reductions in assignment and into a real tangible relationship with the community. And he said, I'd like for you to build that. And I said, good Lord. Yeah. Now that was the sum total of my instruction. I mean sum total. And he drove me down to that. It was an existing prison that we were going to convert. And he drove me down there and introduced me to the staff. And then we went out in the parking lot. He got in the car and drove off. And I said, hey, boss, wait, man. I didn't have a car. I said, borrow one to get it. But anyway, that was my dinner. And that's what I did for most of my career. I was the guy to go to for things that other people had too much sense to do. And so I was just goofy enough to do it. And I had an absolutely magnificent career. At the top of my profession, I became the oldest rat in that barn. And decided I didn't want to be that, so they told me also they'd pay me about as much to not work as they did to work. Even I could figure that out. And so I retired finally, and with 39 years of active service. A wonderful career, absolutely wonderful career. Thank you very much. And you can hurry up and believe that 2 years at Michigan State coming off speed didn't produce that. You know, it's what we're doing here. You know, that sobriety does rock if you do the things that make it rock. If you just sit back waiting for it to happen, you're going to have a long wait. But when you get in there and push the barge and make that thing happen, bring it alive and do the things that make it work, amazing stuff happens. Amazing stuff. Married a little girl from Canada. I guess she didn't particularly care about me, but she wanted out of Canada. And so now we're coming up on 42 years of continuous marriage. Holy mackerel. Yeah. Well, I could tell you all night, but I'm not going to do that because that'd be abusing my guest host. And so let me just tell you that I deeply appreciate your being with me here tonight and listening to the old boy spin his yarn. And whoever you are, I know that there are people here that are in early stages of recovery. And you got just hoping against hope that maybe there's something here. I hope and pray that you'll believe what I'm telling you. And if nothing else, whether you read anything about this story means anything to you, I hope you heard hope. Because I don't care what your situation is. If you'll give yourself to this simple program and work it to the best of your ability, you'll be amazed what will happen. And I sure wish you well. Thanks. Thank you, folks. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. to install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.